In the quiet twilight of an ancient world, where the sky was not yet carved by the borders of kingdoms and the earth whispered secrets of ancestors, there lived a girl named Lyra. She was born in a small settlement on the edge of a dense forest, where a river wove through the hills like a silver ribbon stitched from moonlight. This was a time when people still understood the language of the wind and grass, when gods walked among mortals in the guise of animals or shadows. Lyra was an ordinary child, with hair the color of autumn leaves, cascading in waves over her shoulders, and eyes as deep as wells at night. Her mother, an old healer named Ira, gathered herbs under the moon's glow, murmuring words that mended wounds and banished fevers. Her father, a sturdy hunter, vanished into the forest for days, returning with game that smelled of moss and fresh rain. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Lyra sat by the fire. The air was thick with the scent of roasting meat, a deer her father had caught that morning. Fat dripped onto the coals, hissing softly, like the whispers of spirits. Lyra held a sprig of wormwood, given to her by her mother to ward off insects. But in that moment something stirred. The grass beneath her palms trembled, as if alive. She closed her eyes, and an image bloomed in her mind. A wolf, wandering the forest, hungry and wounded. Her heart ached with pity, and she whispered, "Come here, poor one. I'll share with you." The words slipped out unbidden, light as a breeze. When she opened her eyes, the fire crackled calmly, but her mother was watching her with quiet wonder. "What did you do, child?" Ira asked, her voice soft as silk. Lyra shook her head, unsure. But that night, when the full moon hung over the village like a silver coin, the wolf came. It emerged from the shadowed trees, limping on its hind leg, its eyes glinting yellow in the dark. The villagers grabbed their spears, but Lyra stood, holding out a piece of meat. The beast approached, sniffed, then licked her palm, salty from sweat and warm from the fire. It ate the offering and lay beside her, like an old dog. The wound on its leg, deep and festering, began to heal before their eyes, as if touched by an invisible balm. This was the hook, a small event that tore the fabric of the everyday. By morning, the village buzzed. The old blacksmith, his hands blackened with soot, muttered, "It's witchcraft. The girl has a gift." Children ran about, laughing and frightened at once, while women made signs to ward off evil, recalling tales of witches, women who spoke with the wind and healed shadows. Ira took her daughter's hand and led her to their hut, where the air smelled of dried herbs, mint that freshened the breath, lavender that soothed the heart. "You're not the first, Lyra," her mother said. "Our blood carries an ancient power. Our ancestors, from when the earth was young, knew how to hear the world's heart. But be careful, for a gift is like fire. It warms, but it can burn." Lyra didn't sleep that night. She lay on her straw bed, feeling the cool air from the window brush her skin like ghostly fingers. The sounds of the night surrounded her. An owl's hoot in the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant splash of the river. She thought of the wolf, now sleeping outside the hut, and how her words had stirred something within her. It wasn't just a miracle, it was a beginning. In a village where life flowed slowly, like honey from a hive, such an event could not go unnoticed. The old priest, with a beard white as snow, came the next day. He wore an amulet of deer bone, and his eyes, deep and wise, looked at Lyra as if through time. "The gods have chosen you, child," he said, "but a witch's gift is a burden. In ancient times, when the world was chaos, women like you wove fates and healed the earth. But now, as people forget the old ways, fear can turn to flame. The village was small. Clay and thatch huts huddled together like frightened sheep. Fields of golden wheat swayed around it, and the forest whispered secrets. Spirits of trees, elves in the shadows, and old stones carved with runes by ancestors. Lyra had grown up playing in those shadows, picking berries, sweet and juicy, staining her fingers purple. But now everything had changed. Other girls whispered behind her back. Boys looked at her with fear and fascination. One of them, tall Arn with hair the color of sunlight, approached her by the river. The water lapped against stones, cool and clear, and the air smelled of damp earth. "Aren't you afraid, Lyra?" he asked, his voice trembling faintly. "They say witches can summon storms." She laughed, feeling warmth in her chest, the first spark of love, like a gentle flame. "I'm only afraid of being alone, Arn. Storms, they come on their own." But the event with the wolf set off a ripple. At first, it was whispers in the village. Neighbors came to Ira with requests, to heal a child's cough, to find a lost cow. Lyra helped, her hands trembling, but the power flowed through her like a river. She felt the herbs whisper their secrets. Sage for cleansing, chamomile for sleep. Once, when a storm loomed over the village, its clouds black and angry as the god's wrath, Lyra climbed a hill. The wind whipped her hair. Rain dotted her face, salty with tears. She raised her hands and whispered, "Calm yourself, Sister Storm. Don't break our homes." And the clouds parted, sunlight spilling through, warm and golden. The villagers saw it, and fear mingled with awe. Not everyone rejoiced. In a settlement across the river, a warlord named Thorn, a harsh man scarred from battles, who believed only in the strength of a sword, heard the rumors. He sent messengers. "If the girl holds the power of gods, she must serve us," he thundered at his council, "or we'll burn her as a witch." The whispers spread like smoke from a fire. From village to village, through forests and rivers, people began to come, travelers from distant lands, their eyes filled with hope or envy. One, an old wandering bard with a lute scarred by time, sang songs of ancient witches. They wove fates from threads of moonlight, healed the earth's wounds, but men, blind with fear, drove them into shadow. Lyra felt the world shifting around her. At night, by the fire, she ate simple food, bread, warm and crusty, with honey sweet as childhood memories, and cheese sharp on the tongue. Her mother told stories of ancestors who lived when the gods were near, when witches were priestesses who spoke with spirits. In ancient Elada, they called them Hecates. In northern lands, Vulvas. In our forests, seers, Ira whispered. They knew herbs that healed and words that bound. But there was always balance. Power brings joy, but also pain. The contrast came slowly. The joy of healing. A child laughing after a fever, cheeks pink as apples. But also the darkness. Neighbors' envy, whispers of sorcery. One day, Lyra found a dead hen outside the hut. A warning. Her heart clenched with fear, cold as winter's wind. Arn embraced her, his arms strong and warm, smelling of wood from his work. "I'll protect you," he promised, but doubt flickered in his eyes. The event with the wolf grew. Rumors reached great cities, where priests in temples whispered of prophecy. This is the start of something grand, Lyra thought, gazing at the stars, twinkling like diamonds on black velvet. The power calls me, but where will it lead? She didn't know that soon, travelers would bring news of witch hunts in distant lands, where the fires of inquisitions already burned. But in that moment, under the stars, she felt only a stirring warm as fire, cold as night. And so, in the quiet rhythm of the night, the story unfolded. whispering promises of adventure and danger. Lyra lay down to sleep, feeling the earth beneath her breathe, as if alive. Tomorrow, the migration of ideas, people, and fates would begin, but for now, there was only peace, and the intrigue of what lay beyond the horizon. The first light of dawn crept over the hills, soft as a sigh, bathing the village in a golden haze. Lyra woke to the scent of dew-kissed grass and the faint tang of smoke lingering from last night's fire. The air was cool, carrying the crispness of early autumn, and the river murmured its endless song, a gentle lullaby that had soothed her to sleep since childhood. She stepped outside, her bare feet pressing into the damp earth, each step grounding her in the world she knew. The wolf, whom she now called Shade for the way he blended into the forest's shadows, lay curled near the hut, his fur silvered by morning light. His wound was nearly healed, a faint scar the only reminder of his pain. Lyra knelt beside him, running her fingers through his coarse fur, feeling the warmth of his breath. "You started this, didn't you?" she whispered, half smiling. Shade's amber eyes met hers, steady and knowing, as if he understood more than she did. The village was stirring. The clatter of wooden buckets echoed as women fetched water, their voices mingling with the bleating of goats and the distant bark of a dog. Lyra's mother, Ira, was already at work, grinding herbs in a stone mortar, the sharp scent of crushed rosemary filling the hut. "They're talking about you beyond the river now," Ira said without looking up, her hands steady but her voice heavy with caution. "Travelers carried the tale of the wolf, and now others are coming. Be ready, child. The world is bigger than our forest, and it's moving toward us." Lyra didn't fully grasp her mother's words, but she felt their weight, like a stone in her chest. The small event with Shade had rippled outward, and now the ripples were returning as waves. By midday, a stranger arrived, a wiry man with a weathered face, his cloak patched and dusty from long roads. He carried a staff carved with spiraling runes, and his eyes darted nervously, as if expecting danger in every shadow. "I heard of a girl who speaks to beasts," he said, his voice low, standing at the edge of the village square where men were mending nets and women wove baskets from river reeds. "I've come from the hills of Eldon, 3 days' walk. My son is sick, burning with fever. Can you help him?" Lyra hesitated, her hands tightening around the basket of wild plums she'd gathered that morning, their skins cool and taut, bursting with tart sweetness when bitten. She glanced at Ira, who nodded faintly. "I'll try," Lyra said, her voice quieter than she intended. The man led her to a cart just outside the village, where a boy no older than 10 lay on a bed of straw, his face flushed and slick with sweat. The air around him smelled of sickness, sharp and sour, and his breathing was shallow, like a bird struggling to fly. Lyra knelt, her heart racing. She closed her eyes, as she had with the wolf, and let her hands hover over the boy's chest. Words came unbidden, soft as a lullaby. "Cool the fire, mend the thread, let life flow where pain has bled." Her fingers tingled, as if the earth itself were speaking through her, and when she opened her eyes, the boy's breathing had steadied, his fevered flush fading like a sunset. The man wept, pressing a small copper amulet into Lyra's hands, a token of gratitude, worn smooth by years of touch. "You're blessed," he said, his voice breaking. But as he left, Lyra saw the villagers watching, their faces a mix of awe and unease. The blacksmith's wife whispered to another, her words sharp as a blade. "She's too young for such power. It's unnatural." Arn, who had been splitting wood nearby, his shirt damp with sweat and clinging to his broad shoulders, caught Lyra's eye and offered a reassuring smile. But even his warmth couldn't dispel the chill of doubt creeping into her heart. The news of Lyra's gift spread faster now, carried by travelers and traders who passed through the village on their way to larger settlements. By the next week, a small caravan arrived, 3 families from a distant valley, their ox-drawn carts creaking under the weight of bundled possessions. They spoke of barren fields, of crops withered by drought, and of a hope that the forest which could bless their seeds. Lyra felt the title sting, though she didn't know why. She wasn't a witch, not in the way the old stories told of women who danced with demons or cursed their enemies. She was just Lyra, who loved the taste of wild honey on warm bread, who laughed when Arn splashed her with river water, who felt the earth hum beneath her feet. Yet the world was moving, and Lyra was its center. People came seeking her, some with ailments, others with questions. A woman with calloused hands and a weary smile asked Lyra to find her lost husband, a hunter who hadn't returned. Lyra touched the woman's shawl, threadbare and smelling of wood smoke, and saw a fleeting vision. A man trapped in a ravine, his leg broken. She told the woman where to search, and 2 days later, the man was brought back, alive but weak, his eyes wide with gratitude. Each act of help seemed to pull Lyra deeper into a current she couldn't control. The village, once a quiet haven where days were marked by the rhythm of sowing and harvest, now buzzed with strangers. Tents sprouted on the outskirts, their canvas flaps fluttering like moth wings in the evening breeze. The air carried new scents: roasted chestnuts from a traveler's fire, the sharp tang of foreign spices, the musty smell of hides traded from distant lands. Lyra watched it all with growing unease. One night, as they sat by the hearth, the firelight casting shadows that danced like spirits on the walls, she spoke plainly. "This is no longer just our village, Lyra. Your gift is a beacon, and it draws people like moths to a flame. But not all who come seek light. Some bring darkness." Lyra sipped a cup of chamomile tea, its warmth soothing her throat, its faint sweetness mingling with the smoky air. "What do they want from me?" she asked, her voice small. Ira's eyes, lined with years of wisdom and worry, met hers. "Power, child. Some want to use it, others to destroy it. In the old days, witches were honored, but also hunted. The world is changing again, and you're part of it." The migration wasn't just of people, it was of ideas, of fears, of hopes. Word of Lyra reached the city of Varnholt, a sprawling place of stone walls and bustling markets, where merchants sold silks that shimmered like river water and blacksmiths forged blades that sang when swung. A messenger arrived from Varnholt, a young woman with sharp eyes and a cloak embroidered with the city's sigil, a crescent moon over a flame. She carried a sealed parchment, its wax red as blood. "The Council of Varnholt requests your presence," she said, her voice formal but tinged with curiosity. "They've heard of your deeds and wish to see the girl who tames wolves and storms." Lyra felt her stomach twist, the weight of the plums she'd eaten earlier turning sour. She glanced at Arn, who stood nearby, his axe resting on his shoulder, his jaw tight. "What do they want with her?" he asked, his tone protective. The messenger's eyes flicked to him, then back to Lyra. "They offer protection and perhaps a place among them, but they also wish to understand your power." That night, as Lyra lay in her bed, the straw rustling beneath her, she heard the world outside shifting. The newcomers' campfires glowed like fallen stars, their voices a low hum of stories and songs in languages she didn't know. Shade pressed close to her side, his warmth a comfort against the growing chill of the night. She thought of the messenger's words, of the city she'd never seen, where stone towers rose higher than the tallest trees. She imagined the marketplace, alive with the clink of coins, the shouts of vendors, the smell of fresh bread and spiced wine. But she also remembered Ira's warning, and the dead hen outside their door. The world was stretching toward her, its hands open but its intentions unclear. In the days that followed, more came. A family fleeing a flood, their clothes still damp, their faces etched with loss. A lone wanderer, his boots caked with mud, who spoke of a village where crops grew overnight after Lyra's name was whispered in prayer. Each arrival brought stories, and each story wove Lyra's name into a tapestry larger than her village, larger than the forest. She felt it in her bones. The world was no longer just the river, the fields, the familiar faces. It was vast, and it was calling her. As the sun set on the 10th day since the wolf, Lyra stood on the hill where she'd calmed the storm. The sky was a canvas of crimson and indigo, the air heavy with the scent of pine and coming rain. Below, the village glowed with firelight, but it was no longer just her home. It was a crossroads, a place where paths converged. She felt Shade's presence beside her, his fur brushing her leg, and she wondered what lay beyond the horizon. The messenger's parchment lay heavy in her pocket, its wax seal unbroken. Would she go to Varnholt? Could she stay? The world was moving, and she was its heart. But where would it carry her next? And so, as the stars emerged, pinpricks of light in the velvet night, Lyra stood on the cusp of something vast. The migration had begun, not just of people but of destinies. The next chapter waited, shimmering like the river under moonlight, promising both wonder and peril. The decision weighed on Lyra like the heavy mist that rolled in from the river each dawn, cloaking the village in a soft, ethereal veil. She had kept the messenger's parchment tucked away, its wax seal a constant reminder pressing against her side as she went about her days. Varnholt called, but for now, the world around her demanded attention. The growing throng of seekers who turned her quiet home into a makeshift haven. The sun rose higher each morning, its light filtering through the leaves like spilled honey, warming the earth and stirring the air with the scent of blooming wildflowers. Lyra rose with it, her body attuned to the rhythm of the land, though her mind wandered to the unknown paths ahead. Mornings began simply, as they always had, but now with the added hum of strangers. Lyra slipped from her straw bed, the coarse fibers prickling her skin, leaving faint red lines that faded as she moved. The hut was dim, lit only by the faint glow seeping through the cracks in the door, and the air inside carried the lingering warmth of the banked fire from the night before, smoky and comforting, mixed with the herbal notes of dried sage hanging from the rafters. She splashed her face with water from a clay basin, cool and refreshing, drawn from the river the evening prior. It tasted faintly of minerals, clean and invigorating, washing away the remnants of sleep. Shade stirred at her feet, his tail thumping softly against the packed dirt floor, his presence a silent companion in the quiet routine. Outside, the camp of newcomers was awakening. Tents dotted the meadow like mushrooms after rain, their fabrics faded from travel, patched with whatever scraps their owners could find. The air buzzed with the sounds of life, the crackle of fresh fires being kindled, the low murmur of voices in unfamiliar tongues, the occasional cry of a child or the snort of a tethered horse. Lyra stepped into this world, her simple woolen dress brushing her ankles, its fibers soft from years of wear but sturdy enough for the day's labors. She carried a basket woven from willow branches, its handle smooth from her mother's hands before hers, and set out to gather what the land offered. Breakfast was a communal affair now, no longer just for her family. Ira had taken to preparing a large pot over the central fire in the village square, where flames licked at the blackened iron, sending up spirals of smoke that smelled of burning oak and pine. The pot bubbled with porridge made from ground oats harvested from the nearby fields, thick and hearty, with a nutty aroma that filled the nostrils and promised sustenance. Lyra stirred it with a wooden spoon, feeling the steam rise warm against her face, mingling with the cool morning breeze. They added whatever was at hand. Wild berries plucked from thorny bushes, their juices tart and staining fingers purple. A handful of nuts for crunch, perhaps a drizzle of honey from the village hives, golden and viscous, its sweetness cutting through the blandness like a ray of sunlight. The newcomers joined, offering what they could, dried fruits from southern valleys, hard cheese wrapped in cloth, or flatbreads baked on hot stones. One man, a traveler from the eastern plains with a face lined like old leather, shared strips of salted venison, chewy and rich with the flavor of wild herbs. As they ate, sitting on logs or the damp grass, the group shared stories. Lyra listened, her spoon scraping the bottom of her wooden bowl, the porridge warm in her belly, grounding her against the pull of exhaustion. A woman with braided hair told of her journey, walking for weeks, feet blistered and sore, sleeping under stars that seemed indifferent to her plight. "We ate roots when the bread ran out," she said, her voice steady but eyes distant. "Boiled them in streams, tasting like earth and desperation." Lyra nodded, understanding the quiet strength in survival, the way hunger sharpened the senses, making every bite a small victory. After breaking fast, the work began. The village had always been a place of labor, but now it swelled with helping hands, turning necessity into a shared rhythm. Lyra joined the women at the river, where the water flowed clear over smooth pebbles, its surface rippling like silk in the wind. They washed linens, pounding them against rocks with wooden mallets, the repetitive thuds echoing like a heartbeat. The water was cold, numbing her fingers, but invigorating, carrying away the grime of travel and toil. Soap made from animal fat and ashes lathered into a frothy white, its scent earthy and clean. As they worked, laughter bubbled up, stories of clumsy suitors or mischievous children, lightening the load. But there was darkness too. A young girl among the newcomers confided in whispers about the fever that had taken her brother on the road, his body buried under a cairn of stones, the ground hard and unforgiving. Lyra's gift wove into these daily tasks, no longer a secret but a tool for survival. A man with a festering cut from a thorn approached her mid-morning, his arm swollen and hot to the touch. She led him to a shaded spot under an ancient oak, its bark rough and moss-covered, the leaves rustling like whispers above. She gathered herbs from her pouch, yarrow for cleansing, its feathery leaves releasing a pungent, medicinal smell when crushed, comfrey root, earthy and bitter, to knit the flesh. Mixing them with river water into a poultice, she applied it gently, her hands steady despite the ache in her own muscles from bending and lifting. "Breathe deep," she murmured, and as she spoke words of mending, a warmth flowed from her palms, easing his pain. He sighed in relief, the tension leaving his face, and offered her a carved wooden bead in thanks, small but polished smooth, warm from his pocket. Noon brought the heat of the sun, beating down like a forge hammer, drawing sweat that trickled down backs and stung eyes. Lunch was simple. Bread torn from loaves baked in communal ovens, the crust crisp and golden, the inside soft and steaming. They paired it with fresh vegetables from the gardens, carrots pulled from loamy soil, sweet and crunchy, greens wilted with a splash of vinegar, tangy on the tongue. Water from the river quenched thirst, cool and pure, or sometimes a weak ale fermented from barley, its foam bubbly and slightly sour. Lyra ate quickly, perched on a stump, feeling the sun's warmth seep into her bones, a brief respite before the afternoon's labors. The fields called next, where survival meant coaxing life from the earth. The newcomers helped till the soil, their tools, hoes and sickles, clanging against stones hidden in the dirt. The air smelled of turned earth, rich and fertile, mixed with the sweat of exertion. Lyra worked alongside Arn, his presence a steady anchor. He swung a scythe with practiced ease, the blade whispering through stalks of grain, golden heads falling in neat rows. She gathered them into sheaves, her arms aching from the repetitive motion, bundles heavy and prickly against her skin. "You're quiet today," Arn said, pausing to wipe his brow with a sleeve, his face flushed and streaked with dust. Lyra smiled faintly, the taste of salt on her lips from sweat. "The world's growing too fast. I miss when it was just us, the river, and the stars." He nodded, his hand brushing hers, calloused but gentle, and for a moment, the dark thoughts of uncertainty faded, replaced by the simple joy of shared work. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, the group returned to the village. Bodies were weary, muscles burning from the day's toil, feet sore from uneven ground. Lyra felt it deeply, the exhaustion that settled like a heavy cloak, making each step deliberate. Yet there was satisfaction in it, the knowledge that their labor meant full bellies and shelter. Dinner gathered them again around fires, the night air cooling, carrying the chirp of crickets and the distant hoot of owls. Stew simmered in pots, rabbit caught in snares, tender and gamey, thickened with roots and seasoned with wild garlic, its aroma sharp and inviting. Bread sopped up the broth, warm and filling, while stories flowed like wine. But survival wasn't without its shadows. Supplies stretched thin with the influx. One evening, a fight broke out over a shared loaf, fists flying in the firelight, blood tasting metallic on split lips. Lyra intervened, her voice calm but firm, drawing on her gift to soothe tempers like a balm on a wound. Hunger lurked too. Newcomers shared tales of lean times, bellies empty for days, the gnawing ache that made sleep impossible. And illness crept in. A cough spreading through the camp, wet and rattling, forcing Lyra to brew teas from elderflower, its floral scent masking the bitterness, sipped hot to ease throats raw from dust. Through it all, Lyra found moments of light. Evenings ended with rest, bodies collapsing onto beds of straw or blankets spread on the ground, the earth's coolness seeping up to cradle them. Shade curled beside her, his fur soft and warm, a guardian in the dark. She stared at the thatched roof, listening to the wind sigh through the trees, feeling the day's fatigue melt into a deep, dreamless sleep. But in quiet moments, the parchment from Varnholt called to her, a promise of more, or perhaps a peril. As the moon climbed high, silvering the world, Lyra wondered how long this fragile balance could hold. The daily grind bound them, but whispers of greater changes stirred. The cultural minglings were beginning, flavors and customs blending like spices in a stew, hinting at the encounters to come. For now, though, survival was the rhythm: eat, work, rest, and it pulsed like a heartbeat, steady yet vulnerable. The days blurred into one another as the world converged on Lyra's village, transforming it from a quiet nook in the forest's embrace to a bustling crossroads of hopes and hardships. The air, once crisp with the solitary scent of pine and river mist, now carried the mingled aromas of many lives. The earthy tang of unwashed travelers, the sharp bite of herbs boiling in pots, the sweet undercurrent of wild berries crushed underfoot. Lyra rose each morning to the symphony of awakening, the lowing of oxen, the chatter of children chasing one another through the dew-laden grass, the rhythmic thud of axes splitting wood for fires that never seemed to die out. Her own hut, with its thatched roof sagging like an old friend's shoulders, felt smaller now, crowded by the shadows of strangers who sought her out at dawn. Survival in this ancient world was a tapestry woven from the threads of necessity and nature's whims. For Lyra, it began with the simple act of breaking her fast. She would kneel by the hearth, where embers from the previous night glowed like forgotten stars, and stir a pot of porridge made from ground oats harvested from the golden fields nearby. The grains, coarse and nutty, had been threshed by hand under the summer sun, their husks winnowed away by winds that carried the faint salt of distant seas. She added water from the river, clear and cold, drawn in clay jugs that left her arms aching from the weight. As the mixture bubbled, releasing a comforting steam that warmed her face and filled the hut with a hearty, earthy aroma, she would mix in a handful of dried apples, tart and chewy, preserved from the previous autumn's bounty. The first spoonful was always a ritual, hot on her tongue, sliding down with a soothing warmth that chased away the night's chill, grounding her in the rhythm of the day ahead. Ira, ever the guardian of their small domain, would join her, her movements deliberate and efficient. "Eat well, child," she'd say, her voice a gentle murmur over the crackle of the fire. "The body needs fuel as much as the spirit needs rest." Together, they would share the meal, sometimes augmented by a slab of hard cheese, its flavor sharp and tangy, cut from wheels traded with shepherds from the hills. The cheese carried the essence of the meadows, grassy and slightly floral, a reminder of the goats that grazed on wild thyme and clover. Lyra savored these moments, the quiet before the storm of seekers arrived, feeling the porridge settle in her stomach like a warm stone, providing the strength to face whatever came. Work defined their days, a ceaseless dance with the earth and its gifts. Lyra's mornings often blurred into afternoons spent in the herb garden behind the hut, a patchwork of raised beds where soil, rich and loamy, clung to her fingers like a lover's touch. She weeded with care, pulling stubborn roots that resisted with a satisfying snap, the scent of disturbed earth rising up, damp and fertile, promising growth. The herbs were her allies. Lavender bushes, their purple spikes buzzing with bees, released a calming fragrance when brushed. Rosemary, woody and resinous, invigorated the air with its pine-like sharpness. And sage, velvety leaves soft under her palms, offered a clean, almost medicinal aroma that cleared her mind. She harvested them with a bone knife, its handle worn smooth from generations of use, bundling the stems with twine that scratched her skin lightly. These plants weren't just sustenance. They were survival's tools. Lyra would dry them on racks in the sun, watching as the leaves curled and crisped, their colors fading from vibrant green to muted olive. Later, she'd grind them into powders or infuse them in oils, the process filling the hut with heady scents that lingered on her clothes and hair. When travelers came, weary from their journeys, she offered teas. Chamomile for those whose eyes were shadowed by sleepless nights, its floral sweetness like a lullaby in liquid form. Nettle for the weak, its earthy bitterness masked with honey, strengthening blood and bones. Each brew was a small act of mercy, but it drained her. The constant pull of her gift left her limbs heavy, her mind foggy, as if the earth's energy flowed through her like a river carving stone. The newcomers brought their own rhythms of survival, weaving them into the village's fabric. A family from the flooded valleys set up a tent of oiled hides, stretched taut over wooden poles that creaked in the wind. The father, a broad-shouldered man with calluses thick as leather, spent days fishing the river, his lines baited with worms dug from the mud, their wriggling forms slick and cool. He returned with trout, silver-scaled and glistening, their flesh firm and pink when gutted. Roasted over open fires, the fish released a smoky, savory aroma that drew children like moths, their mouths watering at the flaky meat seasoned with wild garlic, pungent and sharp, cutting through the richness. The mother baked flatbreads on hot stones, kneading dough from barley flour ground in a quern that groaned with each turn. The breads emerged golden and crisp, with pockets of air that popped when torn, steam escaping in fragrant wisps. Sleep was a precious refuge, though often elusive. Lyra's bed was a pallet of straw stuffed into a woolen sack, laid on a frame of lashed branches. It smelled of hay and faint lavender from sachets Ira tucked beneath, a barrier against fleas that sometimes itched her skin in the night. As dusk fell, painting the sky in strokes of indigo and rose, she would lie down, her body aching from the day's labors, the pull in her shoulders from carrying water, the throb in her knees from kneeling in the garden. The sounds of the expanded village lulled her. The soft murmur of conversations around campfires, the occasional laugh like a spark in the dark, the distant hoot of an owl echoing her own watchful thoughts. Shade curled at her feet, his warmth a steady comfort, his breathing a rhythmic counterpoint to her own. But survival wasn't without its shadows. Hunger lurked on the edges, especially as more mouths arrived. The village's stores, sacks of grain in the communal barn, smelling of dust and faint mildew, dwindled faster than the harvest could replenish. One evening, after a long day of healings that left Lyra's head pounding like a drum, she shared a meager stew with Arn. He had hunted that day, returning with a hare, its fur soft and brown, now skinned and simmering in a pot with roots dug from the forest floor, carrots earthy and sweet, turnips bland but filling. The stew bubbled slowly, its broth thin but flavored with bay leaves that imparted a subtle, aromatic depth. They ate in silence at first, the wooden spoons clinking against bowls, the warmth spreading through her like a gentle fire. "It's not enough," Arn said quietly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "The fields are trampled, the game scarcer." Lyra nodded, feeling the gnaw of worry in her gut, sharper than any blade. Work could be grueling, testing the limits of flesh and spirit. Travelers often pitched in, bartering labor for aid. A group of wanderers from the north, their accents thick and rolling like thunder, helped fell trees for new shelters. The axes bit into bark with sharp thwacks, releasing the fresh, sappy scent of pine resin that stuck to skin and clothes. Sawdust floated in the air, irritating throats and eyes, while sweat soaked tunics, leaving salt on lips. By day's end, bodies slumped in exhaustion, muscles burning, hands blistered and raw. Lyra would tend them her salves, made from comfrey root, ground to a paste that smelled green and vital, easing the pain, but the weariness lingered, a deep ache that sleep only dulled. Yet amid the toil, there were moments of light, simple joys that made survival bearable. In the evenings, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows that danced like playful spirits, villagers and newcomers gathered around fires. They shared stories while sipping ale brewed from fermented grains, its yeasty tang warming throats and loosening tongues. Children played games with pebbles smoothed by the river, their laughter bright and unburdened, while elders carved wooden talismans, the shavings curling like whispers. Lyra often joined Arn by the water's edge, where the river's cool mist kissed their faces. They would skip stones, watching ripples spread like her growing fame, and share stolen kisses that tasted of wild mint he'd plucked for her. The contrast deepened as the crowd grew. While some thrived, others faltered. A sickly traveler, his cough wet and rattling, refused Lyra's help out of fear, whispering of curses. He wasted away, his frame shrinking like a leaf in frost, until one dawn he was gone, leaving only a hollow in the grass. Such losses weighed on Lyra, her gift a double-edged sword, saving many, but reminding her of limits. Fatigue became her constant companion, a fog that dulled her senses, making colors less vivid, sounds more distant. As weeks passed, the village adapted, its daily grind forging a fragile order from chaos. Lyra learned to pace herself, rationing her energy like the last loaf of bread. One night, after a day of unrelenting demands, mending a broken arm that smelled of sweat and fear, easing a woman's labor pains with fennel tea that soothed like a mother's touch, she collapsed onto her pallet. The straw pricked her skin, but sleep came swiftly, dreamless and deep. Yet in the quiet hours before dawn, she woke to Shade's low growl, sensing unrest in the camp. Whispers of envy stirred among the newcomers, tales of her power twisted into accusations. The everyday had become a bridge to something more volatile, where cultural clashes waited just beyond the fire's glow. And so, as the moon climbed high, silvering the world in ethereal light, Lyra lay awake, feeling the pulse of life around her. The breaths, the dreams, the unspoken tensions. Survival was more than food and rest. It was navigating the human heart's depths. The encounters of traditions loomed, promising both harmony and discord, as the village teetered on the edge of transformation. The days grew shorter as autumn deepened, the sun tracing a lower arc across the sky, its light softer, tinged with the golden melancholy of fading summer. The village, once a quiet cluster of huts, now thrummed with the pulse of a crossroads, where paths of strangers converged and tangled. Lyra moved through this shifting world, her bare feet pressing into earth still warm from the day's heat, her senses alive to the new textures of life around her. The air carried unfamiliar scents, exotic spices sizzling on fires, the musky tang of strange leathers, the sweet floral notes of oils worn by travelers from distant lands. Sounds wove a new tapestry, laughter in unknown tongues, the twang of a foreign instrument, the clatter of unfamiliar tools. The village was no longer just hers. It was a meeting place, a crucible where cultures collided and blended, sparking both wonder and tension. Morning began with the now familiar rhythm of survival, but the newcomers brought their own ways, reshaping the daily routines. Lyra joined the women at the river, where the water sparkled like polished glass, reflecting the russet leaves drifting from overhanging trees. As they scrubbed linens, a woman from the southern marshes, her skin dark and gleaming like polished oak, introduced a new soap, made from olive oil and scented with jasmine, its lather silky and fragrant, unlike the harsh, ashy bars Lyra knew. We pressed the olives under moonlight, the woman, named Saria, said, her voice warm as the sun. It keeps the oil sweet. Lyra tried it, marveling at how it left her hands soft, the floral scent lingering like a memory of spring. In return, she shared a handful of dried nettle, its earthy bitterness a staple in her mother's remedies, teaching Saria to brew it into a tea that strengthened the blood. Food became a bridge between worlds. At midday, the village gathered around fires, and the meals grew richer with shared offerings. The locals brought their heavy rye bread, its crust dark and chewy, baked in clay ovens until it smelled of hearth and harvest. But the newcomers added their own flavors. Flatbreads from the eastern plains, thin and crisp, dusted with sesame seeds that popped with nutty warmth when bitten. A thick stew from the northern hills, simmered with lentils and strange roots that tasted both sweet and sharp, spiced with a fiery red powder that burned Lyra's tongue and made her laugh through watering eyes. A trader from across the mountains offered dried figs, sticky and sweet, their centers bursting with tiny seeds that crunched softly. Lyra bit into one, the flavor like honeyed earth, and felt a pang of longing for places she'd never seen. Music followed the food, threading through the evenings like a river through a valley. After the day's work, tilling fields, mending roofs, or weaving baskets, the village settled around fires that crackled under a sky pricked with stars. A man from the caravan, with fingers nimble as a weaver's, played a lute strung with gut, its notes plaintive and winding, telling stories of deserts where sand sang under the wind. Lyra, sitting cross-legged on the grass, felt the music tug at her heart, like a memory she hadn't lived. In return, a village elder sang a song of the forest, his voice deep and rough, recounting tales of spirits who guarded the oaks. The newcomers listened, some nodding, others wide-eyed, as if the trees around them might whisper back. Arn, beside Lyra, carved a small wooden flute during these nights, his knife flashing in the firelight. When he played, the notes were hesitant but sweet, like a stream finding its path, and Lyra felt her chest tighten with a warmth she couldn't name. Clothing, too, told stories of distant homes. Lyra's woolen dresses, dyed with woad and madder to shades of blue and red, were practical, their hems frayed from brushing against thorns. But Saria wore flowing robes of linen, light as air, embroidered with threads that shimmered like fish scales. A northern woman, broad-shouldered and silent, draped herself in furs, wolf and bear, stitched with bone beads that rattled softly as she moved. Lyra touched them, feeling the coarse pelts, so different from the soft rabbit skins her mother used for blankets. In exchange, she gave the woman a woven belt, its patterns mimicking the river's curves, dyed with elderberry juice. "It's beautiful," the woman said, her accent thick, and Lyra smiled, seeing her own world through new eyes. Yet these encounters weren't without friction. The blending of ways sparked misunderstandings, like embers catching dry grass. One morning, a dispute flared over a shared fire. A newcomer, a wiry youth from the eastern steppes, roasted a skewer of meat that filled the air with a pungent, unfamiliar spice. Cumin, he called it, sharp and warm. A village elder wrinkled his nose, muttering about foreign filth, insisting the fire be used for their own fish, smoked with juniper as tradition demanded. Voices rose, hands gestured wildly, and for a moment, Lyra feared fists would follow. She stepped between them, her voice steady, drawing on the calm she'd used to soothe the storm. "There's room for both," she said, and offered to split the fire, one side for fish, the other for meat. The compromise held, but the tension lingered, a reminder that differences could cut as well as connect. Customs clashed in subtler ways too. The Southerners prayed to a sun goddess, their hands raised to the sky at dawn, their chants melodic and flowing. The villagers, used to quiet offerings to forest spirits, watched warily, some whispering of blasphemy. Lyra, curious, joined Saria one morning, mimicking her gestures, feeling the sun's warmth on her face as a prayer rose like a bird taking flight. Later, she invited Saria to a village ritual, sprinkling river water on the fields to bless the harvest, the droplets catching light like tiny stars. Saria hesitated, then joined, her laughter mingling with the villagers as water splashed her robes. These small acts built bridges, but Lyra saw the cracks beneath. Distrust, fear of the unknown, the weight of old stories about outsiders. Her gift became a focal point of these encounters. The newcomers sought her out, their ailments and hopes crossing borders of language and tradition. A northern child, shivering with a cough, was brought to her. Lyra brewed a tea of pine needles, its sharp, resinous scent clearing the air, and sang softly, her words weaving health into the child's small frame. A southern trader, his eyes shadowed with grief, asked her to bless a pendant, a token from a lost wife. Lyra held it, feeling its warmth, and whispered words of peace, sensing a faint pulse of memory in the metal. Each act drew her closer to these strangers, their lives intertwining with hers, yet it also set her apart. They called her Forest Witch, a title that felt both heavy and bright, like a crown of thorns and flowers. Arn noticed the change in her. One evening, as they walked by the river, the water dark and rippling under a crescent moon, he took her hand. His fingers were rough, smelling of wood and sap from his day's work. "You're carrying too much, Lyra," he said, his voice low, the concern in his eyes reflecting the starlight. "They look to you like you're a goddess, but you're still one of us." She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder, the steady beat of his heart. "I don't know what I am anymore," she admitted, her breath visible in the cool night air. The river's song filled the silence, a reminder of the life she'd always known, now shifting beneath her feet. The cultural mingling brought light, but shadows followed, whispers of which grew sharper among some villagers, their fear fed by tales of foreign sorcery. One night, a painted stone appeared outside Lyra's hut, red as blood, a warning from someone who saw her gift as a threat. Ira burned sage to cleanse the air, its smoke curling thick and fragrant, but her face was grim. "The world is watching you, child," she said. "Some see hope, others danger. Both will shape what comes next." As the fires burned low and the village settled into sleep, Lyra lay awake, shades warmth pressed against her side. The night was alive with new sounds, lullabies from distant lands, the soft clink of beads, the murmur of prayers to unfamiliar gods. The world was growing, its flavors and songs blending into something vast and vibrant, but also fragile. The tension simmered, and Lyra felt the pull of Varnholt's summons stronger now, a distant promise of answers or peril. What lay ahead? She couldn't say, but the encounters had changed her village forever, and the darker currents were rising, waiting to break the surface. The autumn winds grew sharper, carrying a bite that stung Lyra's cheeks as she stepped out into the gray dawn. The village, now swollen with tents and makeshift shelters, felt like a tapestry stretched too tight, its threads fraying under the weight of so many lives. The air was heavy with the sense of damp earth and wood smoke, but also something new, a faint, acrid undercurrent of tension, like the tang of metal before a storm. The newcomers had brought vitality, their songs and spices weaving color into the village's days. But with them came shadows, hunger, suspicion, and the creeping fear of the unknown. Lyra's gift, once a quiet spark, now burned bright enough to cast long, dark silhouettes across her world. The first signs of trouble were small, like cracks in a clay pot before it shatters. The village's stores, once plentiful with sacks of grain and barrels of salted fish, dwindled under the strain of feeding so many. Lyra noticed it in the mornings, when the porridge pot was scraped clean before everyone had eaten. The oats stretched thin with extra water until the meal was more broth than substance. Its warmth still comforted, sliding down her throat with a faint nutty flavor, but it left her stomach grumbling by mid-morning. The newcomers shared what they could, dried fruits, tough strips of smoked meat, but it wasn't enough. One evening, a fight broke out over a loaf of rye bread, its crust dark and fragrant, torn apart by hands desperate for a share. Fists flew, and a man's nose bled, the metallic scent sharp in the cold air. Lyra stepped in, her voice steady as she called for peace, but the hunger in their eyes lingered, a beast that no words could tame. Hunger wasn't the only shadow. Suspicion festered, fed by the clash of customs and the weight of old fears. The villagers, raised on tales of forest spirits and quiet offerings, grew wary of the newcomers' rituals. The Southerners' sun prayers, with their raised hands and melodic chants, were called unnatural by some. An elder spat into the dirt, muttering of heathen ways. The Northerners, with their furs and bone-carved talismans, were whispered to be wild, their gods too fierce for the gentle forest. Lyra saw it in the sidelong glances, heard it in the hushed tones by the fire, where stories of witches twisted into tales of curses and betrayal. Her own gift, once a source of awe, now drew sharper scrutiny. A woman whose child Lyra had healed, brewing feverfew tea that smelled of apples and eased the boy's shaking, still crossed her fingers when Lyra passed, as if warding off evil. The darker currents swirled closer when theft began to plague the camp. A sack of barley vanished from the barn, its coarse grains vital for the winter ahead. A traveler's knife, its blade honed to a silver gleam, was found missing, only to turn up in another's tent, sparking accusations that echoed through the night. Lyra felt the weight of it, her heart heavy as she walked the village paths, the earth muddy underfoot from recent rains, its chill seeping through her worn shoes. One morning, she found another warning outside her hut, a bundle of blackened feathers tied with red twine, their musty scent mixing with the damp air. Ira burned them in the hearth, the smoke curling thick and bitter, her face lined with worry. "They fear what they don't understand," she said, her voice low. "And fear makes monsters of us all." Lyra's gift, though a beacon of hope, also drew danger. A man from a distant settlement, his cloak tattered and eyes wild, came seeking her one evening. His hands trembled as he spoke of a daughter lost to a wasting sickness, his voice cracking like dry wood. "They say you can bring back the dead," he whispered, his breath sour with ale. Lyra shook her head, her stomach twisting at the thought. "I heal the living," she said gently, offering him a cup of chamomile tea, its floral warmth meant to soothe. But he grabbed her wrist, his grip bruising, and hissed, "If you won't, you're no better than the witches they burn." Shade growled, his fur bristling, and the man fled into the night, leaving Lyra shaken, her skin stinging where his fingers had pressed. The threat of violence loomed closer as rumors from beyond the forest reached the village. Travelers spoke of distant lands where witches were hunted, tied to stakes, their screams swallowed by flames that smelled of pitch and despair. A bard, his lute silent for once, recounted a tale from Varnholt, where a woman who spoke to birds was stoned, her body left for crows. The story clung to Lyra like damp cloth, chilling her even as she sat by the fire, its heat unable to reach the cold knot in her chest. Arn noticed, his hand finding hers as they shared a simple meal of boiled turnips, their flavor bland but filling, paired with a sliver of salted fish that tasted of the river's depths. "You're not alone," he said, his voice steady, his calloused fingers warm against hers. But his eyes held a flicker of fear, and Lyra wondered if he, too, doubted her. The darkest moment came on a moonless night, when the air was thick with the scent of coming frost. Lyra was tending a sick child in the newcomers' camp, a boy whose cough rattled like stones in a jar. She crushed pine needles and honey into a paste, its sharp sweetness cutting through the tense musty air, and sang softly, her words easing his labored breaths. As she worked, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts, the crack of breaking wood, the sharp cry of a woman. Lyra rushed out, shade at her heels, to find a mob gathered around a northern family's tent. The father, his fur cloak torn, stood protectively before his wife and son, a spear in hand. A villager, red-faced and shouting, accused them of stealing grain, pointing to a spilled sack as evidence. "They're thieves," he yelled, his voice raw. "Or worse, cursed by her." His finger jabbed toward Lyra. The accusation struck like a blade. Lyra stepped forward, her heart pounding, the cold air biting her lungs. "No one's cursed," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "We share what we have." But the crowd's eyes were hard, glinting in the torchlight like wolves circling prey. The northern woman clutched a bone amulet, whispering prayers in a tongue Lyra didn't know, her fear palpable. Shade growled, low and menacing, and for a moment, the mob stilled. Lyra raised her hands, not to call power but to plead for calm, feeling the earth's pulse beneath her, steady and slow. "We're all hungry," she said, "but turning on each other won't fill our bellies." Slowly, the tension eased, the crowd dispersing into the dark, but the rift remained, a wound unhealed. Afterward, Lyra sat with Ira by the hearth, the fire's warmth a fragile shield against the night's chill. They sipped nettle tea, its bitterness softened by a drop of honey, the steam curling like spirits in the dim light. "They're scared, child," Ira said, her hands wrapped around her cup, knuckles white. "Your gift is a light, but it casts shadows, and shadows breed fear." Lyra nodded, her throat tight, the tea's warmth unable to reach the cold dread in her bones. She thought of the parchment from Varnholt, still unopened, hidden beneath her pallet. Was it a summons to safety or a trap? The world beyond the forest was vast, but its dangers were growing closer, carried on the wind like ash. The days that followed were heavy with caution. Lyra moved carefully, her healings quieter, her words chosen with care. She tended to small tasks, mending a torn cloak with thread that smelled of wool and lanolin, grinding herbs until her arms ached, sharing sparse meals of barley stew thickened with wild mushrooms, their earthy flavor a faint comfort. But the village was changing, its heart strained by want and fear. Travelers whispered of warlords like Thorn, who sought power over witches like her, their armies marching closer, their fires leaving only ashes. Lyra felt it all, the hunger, the mistrust, the looming threat, like a storm gathering on the horizon, its clouds dark and heavy with rain. As she lay down each night, shades warmth against her side, the straw beneath her prickling through her thin blanket, Lyra listened to the world outside. The campfires burned low, their smoke mingling with the frost, the voices subdued but restless. The cultural encounters had brought richness, but also division, and now the darker tides were rising. Hunger, betrayal, the specter of persecution. Lyra's gift was a flame, but it could burn her yet. The village was no longer just a home. It was a battleground of hearts and fears, and the next chapter loomed, where communities would form or fracture under the weight of what was to come. The frost came early that year, dusting the village in a delicate shimmer that crunched underfoot like brittle glass. Lyra woke to a world transformed, the air sharp and clean, carrying the faint metallic tang of winter's approach. The village, once a cluster of familiar huts, now sprawled with tents and lean-tos, a patchwork of canvas and wood that seemed to breathe with the lives it sheltered. The influx of strangers had stretched the community thin, but in the face of scarcity and suspicion, something new was taking root, a fragile order, forged in the crucible of shared survival. The fires burned brighter now, not just for warmth but as beacons of gathering, where stories, laughter, and the clink of wooden bowls wove people together, however tentatively. Lyra moved through her mornings with a quiet purpose, her breath visible in the cold as she tended to the hearth. The embers glowed like tiny suns, their warmth a lifeline against the chill that seeped through the hut's clay walls. She boiled water drawn from the river, now edged with thin ice that cracked like a whisper under her jug. Into the pot went barley, its grains small and hard, mixed with dried herbs, thyme and rosemary, that released a savory aroma, grounding her in the ritual of feeding others. Breakfast was simple but shared. Porridge ladled into bowls, steam rising in curls, paired with a few preserved berries, their tartness a burst of summer on the tongue. The newcomers brought their own offerings. A northern family contributed smoked fish, its flesh flaky and rich with the scent of alder wood. A southern trader shared dates, sticky and sweet, their flavor like caramelized earth. Each bite was a pact, a silent agreement to face the day together. The village was evolving into something more than a refuge. It was becoming a society, however unsteady. The daily tasks, once solitary, now buzzed with collaboration. Lyra joined the women in the weaving circle, where hands moved swiftly, turning flax and wool into cloth that smelled of lanolin and labor. The looms clacked rhythmically, a heartbeat for the community, producing blankets and cloaks to fend off the growing cold. A newcomer, a wiry man with fingers nimble from years of crafting, taught them to braid hemp into ropes, strong and coarse, their earthy scent filling the air as they worked. In return, Lyra showed him how to carve river reeds into whistles, their high, clear notes delighting the children who ran through the camp, their laughter like bells in the frost. Work shaped their days, binding strangers into a fragile whole. The men, both villagers and travelers, felled trees at the forest's edge, their axes biting into bark with sharp thwacks, releasing the sweet, sappy scent of pine. The logs were dragged back, mud caking boots and hands, to build new shelters. Sturdy frames lashed with rope, roofs thatched with straw that rustled in the wind. Lyra helped stack the wood, her arms aching, splinters pricking her palms, the pain a reminder of the community taking shape. The newcomer's skills enriched the effort. A southern woman, her hands stained with indigo, painted protective runes on the beams, their curves bold and unfamiliar, smelling faintly of crushed berries. A northern hunter showed the villagers how to set snares for rabbits, their meat lean but nourishing, roasted until the skin crisped and fat dripped, sizzling into the fire. Evenings were the heart of this budding society, when the day's toil gave way to gathering. The central fire in the village square roared, its light casting flickering shadows that danced like spirits on the faces of those circled around it. They ate together, sharing stews thick with roots and game, the broth savory with wild onions that stung the eyes when chopped. Bread, baked in clay ovens, was torn and passed hand to hand, its warmth a comfort against the night's chill. Lyra savored these moments, the taste of barley and herbs grounding her, though the portions were smaller now, rationed to stretch through winter. A southern girl, no older than Lyra, offered a sip of spiced wine from her homeland, its flavor warm and peppery, burning softly down her throat. "For courage," the girl said with a shy smile, and Lyra felt a spark of kinship, a thread tying their worlds. Stories were the currency of these nights, traded as freely as food. An old traveler, his beard gray as ash, spoke of cities built on cliffs, where markets buzzed with the clink of coins and the scent of saffron. A villager countered with a tale of the forest's heart, where a great oak whispered prophecies to those who slept beneath it, its leaves smelling of moss and mystery. Lyra listened, her hands wrapped around a cup of mint tea, its cool freshness clearing her mind. Arn, sitting close, whittled a small figure, a wolf-like shade, its curves smooth under his knife. When he pressed it into her palm, it would warm from his touch. She smiled, feeling the weight of his care like a shield against the dark. Music wove through these gatherings, knitting hearts closer. A northern woman played a drum, its hide taut and resonant, the beat steady as a pulse, while a southern boy plucked a lyre, its strings humming with melodies that spoke of sunlit hills. The villagers taught them a song of the river, its words simple but deep, carried by voices rough from work but warm with hope. Lyra joined in, her voice soft, blending with the others, and for a moment, the divisions of origin faded, replaced by a shared rhythm. Children danced, their small feet kicking up dust that shimmered in the firelight, their laughter a fleeting defiance of the hardships outside the circle. Yet the community was not without its cracks. The previous tensions, hunger, theft, accusations, lingered like smoke after a fire. A northern family kept to themselves, their tent set apart, their prayers to a storm god whispered in low tones that unsettled the villagers. One night, a fight broke out over a spilled pot of stew, the precious food soaking into the dirt, its savory scent wasted. Voices rose, and a villager accused the northerners of hoarding, pointing to a hidden sack of grain. Lyra intervened, her gift calming tempers like a breeze over embers, but the distrust simmered. She felt it keenly, her role as healer now also mediator, her energy draining with each conflict soothed. Her gift was both a bond and a burden. People came to her daily, their ailments varied but their need the same. A child with a fever, his skin hot and damp, drank her elderflower tea, its floral sweetness easing his shivers. An old man, his joints swollen from years of toil, sighed as her salve of comfrey and beeswax, smelling of green earth and honey, soothed his pain. Each healing drew the community closer, her touch a thread stitching them together, but it also set her apart. Whispers of which grew quieter but never ceased, and Lyra felt their weight, like stones piled on her chest. Ira watched, her eyes sharp with worry, and one night, as they shared a sparse meal of roasted chestnuts, sweet and starchy, their shells cracking like secrets, she spoke plainly. "You're their heart now, Lyra, but hearts break if stretched too far. Be wary." Festivals began to emerge, small but vital, as the community sought to mark time and hope. On a clear night, when the moon hung low, full and silver, the villagers and newcomers held a harvest rite. They circled the fields, carrying torches that smoked with pine resin, their flickering light painting faces in gold and shadow. Offerings were made, loaves of bread, their crusts warm and fragrant, placed at the field's edge. River water poured into the soil, its coolness a prayer for spring. A southern woman danced, her robes swirling, her movements fluid as water, while a northern boy beat a drum, its rhythm echoing the earth's pulse. Lyra joined, her hands raised, feeling the energy of the crowd flow through her, her gift humming like a quiet song. It was a moment of unity, fragile but bright, a community forming from chaos. But the world outside pressed closer. Travelers brought news of unrest. Villages burned for harboring witches, their ashes carried on the wind. The name of Thorn, the warlord across the river, surfaced again, his scouts seen in nearby woods, their armor glinting like predators' eyes. Lyra clutched the unopened parchment from Varnholt, its wax seal hard under her fingers, a reminder of choices unmade. The community she helped build was a haven, but it stood on shifting ground, its bonds tested by fear and want. As the fires died to embers and the night grew still, Lyra lay on her pallet, shade's warmth a steady comfort. The straw beneath her smelled of hay and faint lavender, a shield against the cold. The village slept, its dreams a mix of hope and unease, the community a tapestry of light and shadow. Lyra felt the weight of her role, its power to unite, its risk of breaking. The legacy of this time was forming, its ripples yet to be seen. But for now, she closed her eyes, the distant drumbeat of the festival echoing in her heart, a prelude to what lay ahead. The frost had settled into the bones of the village, a quiet guest that lingered in the mornings, silvering the grass and turning breath to fleeting clouds. Lyra moved through this crystalline world, her footsteps leaving faint imprints on the earth, each one a reminder of her presence in a place that was no longer just her home, but a tapestry of lives woven together. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and frozen earth, undercut by the faint warmth of smoke rising from the campfires that dotted the sprawling settlement. The community, fragile as it was, had taken root, its daily rhythms of work, meals, and stories forging a new kind of order from the chaos of convergence. But as winter loomed, Lyra felt the weight of her role and the consequences of her gift, settling like snow, heavy and inescapable. The days were filled with labor, but now they carried a deeper purpose. Survival not just of bodies but of the fragile society they'd built. Lyra worked alongside the villagers and newcomers, her hands raw from tying sheaves of harvested rye, the stalks prickly and golden, their dusty scent mingling with the cold air. The granary, a low building of clay and timber, smelled of grain and faint mildew, its stores growing but never enough to ease the knot of worry in her chest. Meals were sparse but communal, shared around fires that crackled with the resinous pop of pine logs. They ate stews of roots and dried fish, the broth thin but flavored with wild herbs, thyme and sage, that Lyra gathered, their aroma earthy and grounding. A southern woman contributed a handful of dried apricots, their sweetness a fleeting luxury, like a memory of sunlit orchards. Each bite was a reminder of their shared struggle, a thread tying them closer even as hunger gnawed at the edges. Lyra's gift remained the heart of this community, a beacon that drew people together but also cast long shadows. She spent hours tending to the sick and weary, her hands moving with practiced care as she brewed teas or applied salves. A child with a persistent cough drank her infusion of horehound, its bitter, minty flavor masked with honey, and smiled as his breathing eased. An old traveler, his fingers gnarled from years of toil, sighed in relief as her comfort salve, smelling of green earth and wax, soothed his aching joints. Each healing was a small victory, a stitch in the fabric of the community, but it drained her. Her body ached, her eyes heavy with fatigue, the weight of expectation pressing like a stone on her chest. Yet she saw the legacy of her actions. A mother's grateful tears, a man's renewed strength, a child's laughter ringing like a bell in the frost. The village had changed, its boundaries blurred by the influx of strangers who brought their skills, songs, and stories. The cultural encounters had left their mark, not just in the new flavors of food or the melodies by the fire, but in the way the community thought and dreamed. The northerners' tales of storm gods mingled with the villagers' forest spirits, creating a new mythology whispered under the stars. A southern weaver taught the women to dye wool with indigo, producing cloaks of deep blue that shimmered like the river at dusk, their scent faintly chemical yet vibrant. In return, the villagers shared their knowledge of the forest's herbs, teaching newcomers to find edible roots, wild carrots, sweet and earthy, dug from frozen soil. These exchanges were the seeds of a legacy, a culture blending old and new, rooted in the land but reaching outward. But the darker currents had left their scars. The hunger, the thefts, the accusations of witchcraft. They lingered like frost that refused to thaw. Lyra saw it in the guarded glances of some villagers, their hands clutching amulets when she passed, their whispers sharp as thorns. The dead hen, the painted stone, the blackened feathers. These warnings were etched in her memory, each one a reminder that her gift was both a blessing and a threat. The stories from beyond the forest, of witch hunts and burning stakes, hung heavy over the village, a shadow that grew longer as winter approached. Lyra felt the pull of Varnholt's summons, the parchment still unopened beneath her pallet, its wax seal a question mark in her mind. Would it offer sanctuary or chains? The legacy of her actions was uncertain, shaped by the balance of hope and fear. Ira, ever her anchor, spoke of this one evening as they sat by the hearth, the fire's warmth battling the chill seeping through the walls. They shared a bowl of roasted chestnuts, their shells cracking open to reveal sweet, starchy flesh that warmed their hands. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and herbs, a comfort against the world's weight. "You're leaving a mark, child," Ira said, her voice steady but her eyes distant, reflecting the flames. "Your gift is changing this place, its people, its future. But legacies are double-edged. They can build or destroy." Lyra sipped a cup of chamomile tea, its floral sweetness soothing her throat, and nodded. "I just want to help," she said, her voice small. Ira's hand, rough from years of work, squeezed hers. "You are. But help can stir storms as much as it calms them." The community's growth was a legacy in itself. The village was no longer a scattering of huts but a small society, with rules unwritten but felt. Disputes over food or space were settled by council now, a circle of elders and newcomers who met under the great oak at the village's edge, its branches heavy with frost, its bark smelling of moss and thyme. Lyra often sat silently among them, her presence a quiet force, her gift a bridge between factions. They decided together how to ration grain, how to share labor, how to protect the weak. A northern hunter taught the children to track rabbits, their small feet leaving prints in the snow-dusted earth, while a southern woman organized a weaving guild, her loom's rhythm a heartbeat for the group. These acts, small but deliberate, were building something lasting, a community that could endure beyond the winter. Yet the outside world pressed closer, its threats shaping the village's future. Travelers brought word of Thorn's scouts moving nearer, their armor clanking through the forest, their fires leaving blackened circles on the ground. The name which was spoken with fear in distant settlements, and Lyra felt the ripples of this fear even here. One night, a traveler from Varnholt, a quiet man with eyes like storm clouds, warned her in hushed tones. "They're watching you," he said, his breath smelling of ale and worry. "The council wants your power, but others want your blood." He slipped away before she could ask more, leaving her with the weight of his words, cold as the frost outside. The legacy of Lyra's gift was written in the lives she touched. She saw it in the northern boy who ran to her with a scraped knee, his trust brighter than the sun. In the southern woman who wove her a scarf, its wool soft and warm, dyed with the indigo she taught them to use. In Arn's quiet presence, his hand steadying hers as they walked the riverbank, the water's icy song a constant in their changing world. But it was also written in the fear, the whispers, the warnings left at her door. Her gift had sparked a community, but it also drew danger, a legacy that could outlast her if she wasn't careful. As the days grew darker, Lyra found herself reflecting on what it all meant. One evening, under a sky heavy with clouds that promised snow, she stood on the hill where she'd once calmed a storm. The wind was cold, tugging at her cloak, its wool smelling of lanolin and home. Shade stood beside her, his fur ruffled, his amber eyes scanning the horizon. Below, the village glowed with firelight, a constellation of lives bound by her presence. She thought of the forest, its spirits still whispering in the leaves, of the river, carrying stories to distant lands, of the people, their hopes and fears shaping a future she couldn't yet see. Her gift had changed this place, its culture, its rhythm, its dreams, but at what cost? The parchment from Varnholt lay heavy in her pocket, its seal unbroken but its pull undeniable. The legacy of this time was still forming, its shape unclear, but Lyra knew it would ripple outward, touching lands and lives beyond her forest. The community she'd helped build was a fragile flame, flickering against the coming storm. As she turned back to the village, the first snowflakes fell, soft and silent, a quiet promise of change yet to come, leading her toward a final reckoning with the world she'd shaped. The snow fell steadily now, blanketing the village in a hush that felt both sacred and foreboding. Lyra stood at the edge of the settlement, her boots sinking into the soft white, the cold biting through the wool of her cloak, its familiar scent of lanolin and wood smoke a faint comfort. The world around her was transformed. Huts and tents cloaked in frost, their edges softened, as if the earth itself were exhaling a quiet dream. The air was sharp, carrying the crisp scent of snow and the distant tang of pine, while the river, half frozen, murmured a slower song, its surface glinting like polished silver under a low, gray sky. Lyra's breath curled in the air, a fleeting ghost, and Shade stood beside her, his fur dusted with flakes, his amber eyes steady as they watched the horizon. The village had become a community, a fragile web of lives woven by necessity and hope, but the weight of Lyra's gift, and the dangers it drew, hung heavier than ever. The parchment from Varnholt, still unopened, felt like a stone in her pocket, its wax seal hard and unyielding. For weeks, she had carried it, its presence a constant question. A summons to power or a lure to peril. The stories from beyond the forest had grown darker. Tales of witch hunts, of fires that consumed the gifted, their ashes carried on winds that now reached her village. Thorn's scouts had been sighted closer, their campfires glowing like predatory eyes in the woods, their armor clanking with purpose. Yet within the village, life pulsed on, a testament to the legacy Lyra had unwittingly forged. The cultural exchanges, the shared meals, the songs by the fire. They had created something new, a society that bore the marks of her hands, her voice, her gift. Mornings were quieter now, the cold slowing movement, but the community held fast. Lyra joined the women at dawn, their hands chapped and red as they broke the thin ice on the river to draw water, its chill numbing their fingers. They boiled it in iron pots over fires that smelled of oak and resin, brewing teas of dried mint and chamomile, their floral warmth a small defiance against winter's grip. Breakfast was meager, barley porridge stretched with ground acorns, its nutty bitterness softened with a drizzle of honey, the last from the village hives. The newcomers shared their dwindling stores. A northern family offered smoked venison, its gamey richness a reminder of the forest's bounty. A southern trader gave a handful of dried figs, their sticky sweetness a fleeting taste of distant summers. Each meal was a ritual binding them closer, a reminder that survival was a collective act. The village had grown into a small world of its own, its routines a blend of old and new. The northerners' runes now adorned the granary door, painted in ochre that smelled faintly of earth and iron, believed to ward off scarcity. The southerners' weaving techniques had spread, their indigo-dyed threads creating cloaks that draped the villagers in shades of twilight, soft and warm against the snow. Lyra saw her own influence in these changes. Her herbal knowledge had become a shared language, with children learning to identify yarrow and sage, their hands stained green as they crushed leaves under her guidance. The songs by the fire now mixed melodies of the forest with the lilting tunes of southern hills, creating a harmony that echoed in her dreams. But the legacy of her gift was not all light. The whispers of which had quieted but never vanished, lingering like frost in the shadows. Some still crossed their fingers when she passed, their eyes wary, as if her power might turn on them. The warnings, the dead hen, the painted stone, the blackened feathers, had marked her, a reminder that fear could outlive trust. Lyra felt it keenly one evening, as she sat with Arn by the river, its banks crusted with ice that cracked under their weight. They shared a small loaf of rye bread, its crust hard but warm from the oven, paired with a sliver of cheese that tasted sharp and grassy. Arn's hand found hers, his fingers rough but gentle, smelling of wood from his day's work carving beams for a new shelter. "You've changed this place, Lyra," he said, his voice soft, his breath visible in the cold. "But it's changing you too. You're quieter, like you're carrying the whole world." She leaned against him, feeling his warmth, the steady beat of his heart. "I don't know how to stop," she admitted, her voice barely above the river's murmur. The turning point came on a night when the snow fell thick, cloaking the village in silence. Lyra was tending a fire in the square, its flames licking at logs that hissed with sap, when a stranger arrived. A woman cloaked in furs, her face gaunt, her eyes haunted. She carried a staff carved with symbols Lyra didn't recognize, and her voice trembled as she spoke. "They're coming," she said, her words sharp as the wind. "Thorn's men. They burn what they fear, and they fear you. The crowd around the fire stilled, their faces pale in the flickering light, the air heavy with the scent of burning pine and unspoken dread. Lyra felt Shade press against her leg, his growl low, a warning. She stood, her heart pounding, and spoke to the woman. "What do they want?" The stranger's eyes met hers, hard as flint. "Your power or your end." That night, Lyra finally broke the seal on Varnholt's parchment. By the dim light of a tallow candle, its smoky scent filling the hut, she read the words. An invitation to join the council, to wield her gift under their protection, to shape a new order. But between the lines, she sensed a demand, a leash for her power, a claim on her freedom. Ira watched, her face unreadable, as she stirred a pot of nettle tea, its earthy bitterness a mirror to the moment. "What will you do, child?" she asked. Lyra folded the parchment, her fingers trembling, the wax crumbling like dried blood. "I don't know," she said, her voice a whisper, "but I can't stay and bring ruin here." The decision came at dawn, as the village woke to a world of white. Lyra stood before the gathered community, their breath clouding the air, their faces a mix of trust and fear. She spoke of leaving, of seeking answers in Varnholt, of protecting the home they'd built together. Some protested, their voices rising like the wind. Others nodded, their eyes heavy with understanding. Arn stepped forward, his hand gripping hers, his warmth a tether to the life she loved. "I'll go with you," he said, and she felt a surge of gratitude, like a fire kindled in her chest. As she prepared to leave, Lyra saw the legacy of her time here etched in the world around her. The village bore her mark. In the herb gardens, now tended by others, their leaves fragrant with life. In the songs that blended forest and foreign melodies, sung by children who no longer feared her. In the community that had grown from chaos, its bonds fragile but real. Her gift had sparked it all, a flame that warmed but also drew danger. The echoes of this time, she knew, would live on, in the stories told by the fire, in the herbs used to heal, in the patterns woven into cloth, in the trust forged through shared survival. Today, those echoes linger in the world we know. The village is gone, its huts reclaimed by the forest, but its spirit survives in the traditions that spread outward. The herbal knowledge Lyra shared became the root of remedies still used, their scents of sage and chamomile familiar in modern apothecaries. The songs by the fire, blending north and south, echo in folk melodies played at festivals, their rhythms a bridge across centuries. The indigo-dyed cloaks, once a novelty, inspired patterns and textiles that adorn markets today, their deep blues a nod to a forgotten girl's influence. Even the language carries her trace, words for healing, for community, for the balance of power and fear, passed down through generations. Lyra's journey to Varnholt marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, its details lost to time but its impact enduring. She left the village under a sky heavy with snow, Shade at her side, Arn's hand in hers, the path ahead uncertain but alive with possibility. The world she'd shaped remained, a quiet testament to a girl who spoke to wolves and storms, whose gift was both her burden and her legacy. As she stepped into the forest, the snow falling soft and silent, Lyra felt the earth beneath her breathe, its pulse a promise that her story, like the river, would flow on. And so, the tale closes with a whisper of snow, a fire's glow, a girl's courage, a story that lingers in the air, like the scent of herbs or the echo of a song, inviting us to listen, to remember, to feel the world she touched.